Number one, this project has cleared every environmental hurdle and it has met the complete environmental review. Number two, it has the support of about 35 to 40 key organizations, from organized labor to organized business and to many groups in between.
Of course, those who seek only to use the obvious for their commentary and such were opining at length about what Mary Landrieu said in her response to now being somewhat unimportant in Louisiana and national politics. But we here at MidPoint, we take a different tack. We do not let your eyes deceive you, because your eyes do not always tell you what they're saying. Let us welcome back to MidPoint the co-author of Reading People, How to Understand People and Predict Their Behavior. Wendy Patrick joins us again. Wendy, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, there you go. A little Skype problem here this week, but don't worry about it because you're seeing the tapes, you've seen them, so here we go. Let's get right to it. Wendy Patrick talks now a little bit about Mary Landrieu. Here we go. The Democrat from Louisiana, the heated runoff, we know all about this, goes directly against the president and says she's going to push to get the Keystone Pipeline approved. Guys, do we have that again to play, or are we going to go from what we heard right there at the top? Let me just ask the control room. What do you want to do? Just going to go from what we heard at the top? Okay. Sorry, Wendy, I had to make sure we weren't going to play it again. You heard the cut now. What exactly do you take from Mary Landrieu?
Well, I'll tell you what, she was incredibly well prepared. One of the things I think that really makes this a great clip is she really took advantage of being in the spotlight. She had those things absolutely memorized and really made a good use of literally being surrounded by both news cameras and by people that were supporters. So I thought it was a great clip, and it really, it really goes to show if you prepare your sound bites ahead of time, you can come across smelling like a rose. And I thought she did in that clip. Very well put together.
Well, that's just it. She was very well prepared for that, because I would guess you'd want to say that that's not something you want to take off the cuff. She knew that was coming. And then there was a lot of questions about whether or not she was even still relevant to the Democratic Party. And at that point, again, kept the stone face moving and just looked straight ahead.
Absolutely. And, that was all part of it, because especially when you're saying something that might not be very popular, you really got to back it up and substantiate it. So by those clips she went through, it's obvious she put a lot of thought into that, and it showed.
All right, let's move on now. House Speaker John Boehner, he was talking about President Obama's plan to proceed with amnesty, which we've talked about a lot here, without congressional approval. And John Boehner was flat out, he was harsh, he was right on point, and here's what he said.
The president's threatening to take unilateral action on immigration, even though in the past he's made clear he didn't believe he had the constitutional responsibility or authority to do that. And I'll just say this. We're going to fight the president tooth and nail if he continues down this path.
Wendy, you look at John Boehner, and he's kind of like the guy you wouldn't want to mess with. I mean, he seems like he's very well practiced in a lot of this, but what did you take from the fact that he pretty much laid down the law?
His message matched his mannerisms. Sometimes we talk about the mismatch. Boy, this is not one of those occasions. Speaking of the visual, I am back up on Skype, so we got that resolved. So look at John Boehner's face. I think that really says it all. If you look at a text, remember the transcript text, what did he say? It does justice to look at the way he delivered those points. So this is a man that really is ready for action and really just laid it all on the line using a very well-known analogy. I think you're absolutely right. He was serious, and it showed.
Well, also, speaking in cliches is not a bad idea sometimes, is it? Because you will get noticed and people will quote you.
Well, it's interesting because he chose a cliche that some have interpreted as condescending. But when you match what he said with the way he looked, his message was loud and clear. Like you say, it was just a way to really get a message across, also almost softening what I think he really meant to say, which was how serious it would be if the president moves forward in his intended course of conduct.
All right, let's move on to Jonathan Gruber. My goodness, the dear professor here, who's getting a tremendous amount of attention, not the kind that most people want. The architect, one of the architects, if you will, about Obamacare. He was found on a videotape from several years ago, basically saying the American voters were stupid and that would help in passing Obamacare. Now he has to basically come up and he has to defend that and or apologize. Here was his first statement that he made after this story broke.
This bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes. Lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to getting the thing to pass. Yeah, there's things I wish I could change, but I'd rather have this law than not.
Okay, now I was told that we had it. Guys, do we have the clip of him now also? So that was the setup there. Now let's go to the clip where he defended himself.
The comment and the video were made at an academic conference. I was speaking off the cuff, and I basically spoke inappropriately, and I regret having made those comments. Public policy that involves spending is typically less politically palatable than policy that involves doing things through the tax code. It would have made more sense to do Obamacare the way we did in Massachusetts, which would be to just actually give people money to offset the cost of their health insurance. That was politically infeasible, and so instead it was done through the tax code, and that's the only point I was making.
All right, Wendy, how did he do in his mea culpa?
I thought he did well. Can you imagine the guts it took for him to go on national television and be asked these questions? It is the art of pedaling backwards, okay? How can he possibly take the wind out of our sails when everyone is this incensed about his comments that he made back in 2000 and, it's the comments at the academic conference. Yet would be showing much different footage. But he really diffused the scenario by having his expressions really match the mea culpa. We're a society of forgivers. But in order to forgive, we need that apology. And he actually not only apologized verbally, but his expression matched what he said. It was really delivered as best it could have been.
All right, 45 seconds. Here's Nancy Pelosi basically saying she had no idea who this guy is.
That Mr. Gruber's comments were a year old, and he has backtracked from most of them. I don't know who he is. He didn't help write our bill. And so, with all due respect to your question, you have a person who wasn't writing our bill commenting on what was going on when we were writing the bill, who has withdrawn some of the statements that he made. So let's put him aside.
20 seconds, Wendy. Not a great job.
You can't put him aside because she quoted him in 2009 when she was first talking about the bill. This is clearly not Nancy Pelosi at her best. It is probably her about as flustered as we've ever seen her because of the awkwardness of the scenario, and she probably couldn't believe it like anybody else listening to these comments. So what she reveals through her body language and her speech pattern is the same affect we feel when we have been seeing some of this footage from the academic conference.
There you go. Wendy Patrick, always a pleasure. All out of time. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon. We're back on MidPoint.